We've shared many magic moments together, the early days and television specials, recording, and doing the movie The Wiz. Well, you know,
She was his mentor, his muse, his second mother. For decades, Diana Ross and Michael Jackson shared a bond that transcended music, fame, and even family. From the moment she introduced a young Michael and his brothers to the world on the Ed Sullivan Show, their paths were forever intertwined. But behind the hugs, the onstage appearances, and carefully worded interviews, there was a truth Diana Ross never spoke aloud. Until now. At 81, the Queen of Motown has decided to tell her truth. And it's not what fans expected. For years, people speculated about the depth of their relationship. Some called it maternal, others whispered it was romantic, while a few claimed it was purely professional. But only Diana knew what truly lived in the silences between them, what passed in the long glances, and what was lost in the shadows of global fame. And in a rare, unfiltered conversation, she finally opens up about the Michael she knew, the pain she witnessed, and the secrets they promised to protect. Because while the world crowned her a legend and him a king, what connected them wasn't music or money, it was survival. And what Diana Ross reveals today may forever change how we see Michael Jackson, and how we remember the woman who stood quietly by his side for a lifetime. It was 1969. Diana Ross was already a household name, the luminous star who had led the Supremes to become the most successful female vocal group in history. But on that fateful night, she did something that changed pop culture forever. She introduced the Jackson 5 on national television. What the world didn't see was what happened backstage. Michael, only 10 years old, was nervous. His voice was perfect, but his confidence still wavered. Diana didn't just usher him to the microphone. She calmed him, mothered him. She looked him in the eyes and told him, "They're going to love you." From that moment forward, he followed her like a shadow. Diana didn't just open doors for Michael, she shielded him. In a music industry dominated by men and executives with questionable motives, she became his anchor. At Berry Gordy's request, she even pretended the Jackson 5 were her discovery, lending them instant credibility. But it went deeper than business. She invited Michael into her home. He spent holidays with her family. He watched her rehearse, perform, and carry the weight of a career with elegance and discipline. In many ways, Diana became the blueprint for the kind of star and person Michael wanted to be. As the years passed and Michael's star began to rise beyond even Motown's dreams, his bond with Diana Ross didn't weaken. It evolved. Fame changed him, but around Diana, he remained soft-spoken, respectful, almost childlike. And Diana, despite her own soaring career, always made space for him. In interviews, Michael often called her his mother, though biologically she wasn't. That title wasn't just symbolic. During one of his most vulnerable years, when tensions with his father Joe Jackson ran high, Michael seriously considered legally naming Diana as his guardian. He trusted her with everything: his fears, his questions about the industry, and his increasingly fragile sense of self. Diana, in turn, was one of the few who could speak to him frankly, who could call him out without being shut out. "You're losing yourself," she once told him, after a stretch of erratic appearances in the early 2000s. "Don't forget who you are, and who you were before the world told you." But their relationship wasn't without pain. Diana watched as Michael's world turned darker. The surgeries, the isolation, the allegations, and while she rarely spoke about it publicly, those close to her say she agonized in private. "It broke her," said one longtime friend. She felt helpless, watching him become someone the world both adored and tore apart. Despite the chaos, Michael continued to name Diana as a central figure in his life. When he drafted his will in 2002, he named her as the secondary guardian of his children, after his mother, Catherine. It was a quiet, powerful gesture, one that spoke volumes about the depth of his trust. To the public, Diana and Michael were simply music royalty. But behind closed doors, they were something else entirely. Two people navigating superstardom, loneliness, and the heavy burden of being icons, leaning on each other more than the world ever knew. As Michael's fame intensified in the 1980s and early 1990s, Diana Ross watched with a mix of pride and dread. He had become the biggest star in the world. His Thriller album had shattered records. His dance moves had become cultural phenomena, and his face was everywhere. But the higher he rose, the more isolated he became. And Diana saw the warning signs long before most. In private conversations, she urged him to slow down. "Take time for yourself," she'd say. "The world will wait." But Michael, driven by perfectionism and haunted by childhood trauma, couldn't stop. He felt the pressure to always be Michael Jackson, to outperform not just the competition, but himself. Diana witnessed how fame distorted his world. He was surrounded by yes men, people who feared upsetting him. Diana was different. She wasn't afraid to be honest. "You don't have to disappear to be loved," she once told him, referencing his changing appearance and increasing reclusion. But by then, the transformation had already begun. Diana remained close, but not always publicly. She believed that protecting Michael sometimes meant staying out of the headlines. She spoke to him quietly, behind the scenes, offering support in ways that weren't always visible. When the first wave of allegations hit Michael in 1993, Diana was devastated. She didn't believe them, not for a second. But she also knew the damage was already done. The media frenzy, the public doubt, it chipped away at Michael's soul. And Diana, helpless to stop it, kept her distance publicly while doubling down on her private loyalty. She felt torn, a close associate revealed. She wanted to scream his innocence, but she also knew her voice might not help him. It might make things worse. Still, she never abandoned him. When others disappeared, Diana stayed in touch. When Michael was hospitalized, she sent flowers and messages. And when he finally began to unravel emotionally in the late 90s and early 2000s, she tried more than once to get him to step away from the spotlight. But he wouldn't, or couldn't, and Diana, watching someone she once saw as a bright-eyed boy full of wonder descend into darkness, carried a private guilt she's never fully expressed. Until now, by the time the 2005 trial began, the one that would come to define Michael Jackson's later years, Diana Ross had gone almost completely silent on the matter. Many speculated she had abandoned him, but the truth, as she finally admits now, was more complicated. "It wasn't about turning away from Michael," she says. "It was about protecting him from me." What she meant was this: every headline she created, every comment she made, every expression of support could be twisted by the media into something Michael would have to answer for. He was fragile, already reeling from betrayal and shame, and Diana feared that even her love could become a weapon in the hands of a press that smelled blood. But that didn't mean she wasn't there. According to those close to her, Diana checked in regularly during the trial. She sent letters, long, handwritten ones, reminding Michael of who he really was. "They don't get to define you," she wrote in one note. "You were whole before them, and you'll be whole after." When the verdict finally came in, not guilty on all counts, Diana cried, not just from relief, but from sadness, because she knew, even in victory, something inside Michael had been broken beyond repair. He was never the same, she now admits, and I don't think the world realized how deep the damage went. In the following years, their contact became more sporadic. Michael, ever more reclusive, spoke to fewer people. But when he was preparing for his comeback, the This Is It tour, Diana was one of the few people he confided in. He called me and said, "Miss Ross, I'm coming back. I'm going to show them I'm still the king." And I told him, "You don't have to prove anything, baby. You already are." It would be one of their last conversations. On June 25, 2009, Diana Ross was alone at her home when the news broke. Michael Jackson, her baby, her brightest star, her complicated beloved friend, was gone. And even though the world wept, Diana couldn't bring herself to speak. Not at first. Because how do you mourn someone you loved like a son, in front of a world that only saw the headlines? In the aftermath of Michael Jackson's death, the world searched for answers. Tributes poured in from around the globe. Old friends re-emerged with stories. But one name was quietly and prominently etched into his final wishes: Diana Ross. When Michael's will was unsealed, it shocked many to learn that if his mother Catherine were ever unable or unwilling to care for his children, Diana Ross would become their guardian. Not a sibling, not a friend, not a fellow entertainer. Diana. It was a decision that spoke volumes. To Michael, Diana wasn't just a mentor, she was family. The one person outside his bloodline who had truly seen him, accepted him, and protected him from the world's harshest lights. Naming her in his will was more than legal formality. It was a final act of trust. Diana, ever private, didn't speak about the will for years, but recently she's revealed how much that gesture meant to her, and how heavy it felt. "I wasn't expecting it," she admitted, "and when I read it, I broke down. Because even in death, he believed I could keep them safe." Ultimately, Catherine Jackson did take custody of Prince, Paris, and Blanket. Diana remained in the background, respectful of the Jackson family, but ever present when needed. She sent birthday gifts. She called on holidays. And when Paris Jackson began her public struggle with grief and mental health, Diana reached out quietly. She told her she wasn't alone. A source close to the family said that her father loved her more than the world ever understood, and that she'd always have someone watching out for her. Diana never tried to replace Michael, nor did she want to, but she honored his wishes in the way that mattered most, by continuing to love his children, fiercely and without fanfare. She also kept another promise, a private one, made to Michael long before the world turned on him. "You told me to always remember the boy," she once wrote in a letter that was never made public until now. "Not the king, not the legend, just the boy, and I do, every day." It's that boy, she says, that still visits her in dreams. For over a decade after Michael's passing, Diana Ross remained largely silent. She didn't give tearful interviews. She didn't appear at tribute concerts. She didn't write a tell-all memoir. And to some, her absence from the public grieving felt like distance. But behind the curtain, that silence was not neglect. It was reverence. Diana believed Michael's story had been told too loudly, too violently. Every tabloid headline, every leaked tape, every conspiracy. It all felt like noise, and she didn't want to add to the noise. She wanted to protect the quiet truth of the Michael she knew. So she grieved in silence. She kept the handwritten notes he had sent her over the years. Notes filled with drawings, with declarations of love and gratitude. She stored them in a carved wooden box, the same box her own children's letters had gone into. When she walked by the piano in her home, she would sometimes stop and play the opening notes of "I'll Be There" or "Gone Too Soon," not for anyone to hear, just for herself. Those close to Diana say her quiet mourning shaped her final years. She started talking more about legacy, a friend revealed, not just hers, but Michael's too. She didn't want his memory trapped in the scandal. She wanted people to remember the heart. It's why, at 81, she finally chose to speak. Not for press, not for spectacle, but because time had gifted her the clarity and peace to say what mattered. "I was always afraid that if I spoke, it would get twisted," she explained. "But now, I don't need to protect an image. I just want to tell the truth." And the truth she shares is simple, but powerful. That Michael Jackson, for all his flaws and contradictions, was a man of immense love. That behind the headlines was a soul in pain who never stopped craving kindness. And that through it all, he had one unwavering constant: her. "I wasn't perfect," she says now. "I didn't always know what he needed, but I loved him, and I still do." That, Diana believes, is the part of the story that never made it to the stage. But maybe it should have. Today, Diana Ross stands as one of the last living links to the golden age of Motown, and to the boy who would become the king of pop. She looks back not only on her own life and career, but on the shared legacy she and Michael built. One forged in music, loyalty, and the rare kind of love that fame can't touch. And in that reflection, she finds both peace and sorrow. She's watched the world rediscover Michael over and over again. In documentaries, in TikToks, in tribute tours. She's heard his voice played at weddings, seen young dancers mimic his moves, read think pieces debating his legacy. But through all of it, she holds on to the version of him that none of those stories capture. The quiet boy who once whispered, "Miss Ross, I want to be just like you." She didn't know then that he'd become bigger than all of them, or that he'd burn so brightly it would eventually consume him. But she did know one thing: he wasn't just special, he was precious. And now, decades later, she wants the world to remember that. So if you hear a Michael Jackson song today, if you find yourself humming Billie Jean or watching the Thriller video for the 1,000th time, Diana hopes you'll look past the mythology, past the headlines, past the tragedy, and see the boy she protected, the boy she watched become a man, the boy whose soul she never stopped loving. Because in the end, the real truth about Michael Jackson isn't in a scandal, or a court case, or a YouTube documentary. It's in the people who knew him, who loved him, who still feel him in every note. And Diana Ross? She's one of the last still standing, still singing, and still remembering. So, what do you think of Diana Ross's truth? Does it change how you see Michael Jackson? Or how you remember the two of them? Not just as icons, but as deeply human souls tied by something far greater than music. Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, the unseen, the unspoken, the deeply personal, hit that subscribe button. Because the real stories of our greatest legends don't always happen under the spotlight. Sometimes they live in the quiet, between a mother's love and a boy's dream.